It might feel like stable ground to be in a job right now in this moment. That's great. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to invest in ourselves because what we need is not IQ or EQ. Primarily, we need AQ. And AQ is very, very much in flux. Like you can actually control that. You can will your AQ to be higher tomorrow than it is today simply through the actions you take.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Today, we are talking all about intelligence. That's human intelligence. You know, there are so many different kinds of ways to be smart. We talk about IQ. Traditionally, that is how book smart you are. Then in recent decades, we've talked about EQ. That's your emotional quotient, how good you are at reading people. Well, our author today introduces a new kind of intelligence that is specific to this moment that we're in now. She calls it AQ, our agility quotient. It addresses the question that is on a lot of our minds. Is there actually a way to predict how well equipped we are for change? Today's guest, Liz Tran, is proposing that yes, there is a way to measure how well we will handle uncertainty. And importantly, that it's possible for us to get better at it, to raise our agility quotient, our AQ. Liz Tran is a leadership coach and the author of AQ, a new kind of intelligence for a world that is always changing. Here's Liz.
So your AQ stands for your agility quotient, and it's your capacity to handle change, disappointment, and uncertainty without losing your footing. And the reason why that's important is because it's not just a trait, like, oh, how good are you when things change? It is actually a standalone intelligence on par with IQ and EQ. And I think the most important thing to understand is that it's a product of today. In the same way that IQ was a product of the 1880s, 150 years ago, when it came out, and the whole world was moving towards industrialization. So they needed a way to sort, rank, and place people into the right cognitive levels for school, for factories, for the government, for military, et cetera.
And we have to stop here and dig in, because this was like the first big aha for me. I've grown up in the age of IQ, and IQ is the dominant sorter, right? Your IQ was, I don't even know exactly what it is, but I knew that by the time I started school, it mattered a lot to my parents that they understood that I had a high IQ.
Yes.
And even though in many ways I realized that my IQ didn't really pair with my success, I didn't quite know how to let go of that, and I probably care a little bit too much about it for my own kids. And yet we're stepping into a world where an IQ is actually kind of a backward-looking way of understanding the intelligence that helps us to survive the best.
Especially because AI has been a huge leveler of IQ. If you think about what IQ is, it's your capacity to have memory,
right?
Synthesis, to analyze well. And we all can have that at our fingertips with any LLM that we choose to use. And so I do think that, of course, it matters, but it matters so much less because it's honestly like we can all have it, right? No matter if your IQ is high or low. And another thing, too, is that I think what people have found is that the correlation is not there. A lot of the standardized tests that we take are pretty equivalent to, measuring IQ. And it's not a predictor of how successful, happy, fulfilled you will be in life. And there was even a study done by one of the forefathers of IQ that tracked 1,500 kids as they went through their entire lives, from when they were young children to when they passed away. And it found that there was no correlation. There were no people who were marked as geniuses in that study who actually became Nobel-winning scientists, artists. They were all just sort of regular people. And in fact, there were multiple people who didn't make it into the study because their IQs weren't high enough who went on to win Nobel Prizes, et cetera. So
when I read about that in your book, I felt this deep sigh of freedom within me. The high IQ test actually missed a Nobel Prize winner. Maybe it isn't the panacea that it was made out to be.
What I propose is that what we need is not IQ or EQ. Primarily, we need AQ, and we actually all have it as a fundamental human innate ability. It is our birthright. If you think about where we came from, at some point, our ancestors were all hunter-gatherer nomads. and they were roaming the plains. So very much our brains and our bodies are meant for this type of life where we don't know where the next meal is going to come from or where we're going to sleep. Tomorrow is not a guarantee. And so even as we've evolved today, we've just forgotten that side of ourselves because we live in, 97% temperature controlled environments, right? Either the car, the office, or the home. And we've tricked ourselves into believing that this blip in time that we had, that past 150 years from the 1880s until roughly now, that's how life has always been. But we need to remember that our birthright of AQ stretches way farther back into that. And I would invite anyone who's listening to the show to think about a moment that rocked them. It could be now, it could be 10 years ago. And I think what you will find in how you responded and reacted is actually a lot of pride for what you were able to do in an unknown, unpredictable situation.
So right now you're actually asking us to conjure, maybe it was like a terrible moment in our career. For me, a moment when I lost a story and the editor-in-chief flat out told me, you're not a good enough writer to do this story. Terrible moment. And I offer that because I think that what you're saying is so true for me. Like in the moment that was so terrible, but now, a decade into the future, I look back and I say, oh, that's the moment that made me.
What did you do?
Whew. I started looking outside my organization for advice and feedback and opportunity. And I started looking inside myself for what mattered to me in ways that I'd never asked of myself or others. And what I found was a path to a richer creative life and a richer economic opportunity.
And that's actually the premise of AQ, which is that the hard times can become the good times when you look inside and you look outward. And by inside, I mean you use that time to evaluate who it is that you want to be and who you want to become, and then outside to expand the aperture of your known universe. And I love that that's what you did because that's AQ in action.
Well, okay. So what I love about your framework is that you make it extremely practical to put into action. And in fact, you go so far as to ask us to play to our strengths and then to give us an opportunity to reflect on our character through a series of categories that you have arrived at through a rich career in coaching and through research. And I'm going to tell you, when you were like, answer these 10 questions, and I'm going to tell you something about yourself. I was like, you are not, Liz. You are not. Check, 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 check. And you know what? The categories hold. So those categories are astronaut, novelist, firefighter, and neurosurgeon.
You got it.
You're a novelist. I'm a novelist. So let's start with that one. Who is a novelist? What defines a novelist?
What we're talking about are the AQ archetypes, and these are descriptors for your style of handling change, disappointment, and uncertainty. And when you know your archetype, what you're learning is what your core strengths are, what tools you have in your toolkit for handling volatility. So the novelist, I think, because I'm a little biased, has a great toolkit. They are planners. They're researchers. They make a timeline. So imagine a novelist at work at their desk. They're shaping a plot, they're coming up with characters, and they're driving towards an end goal. That means that you and I are people who love agendas. We love 5-year plans. We love knowing exactly what we need to do and then checking the boxes on that. The downside is that when life unfolds in a way that we did not put on our map, it can be extremely disorienting. So imagine something as small as a meeting getting canceled that you had prepped for, or a little bit larger, a flight gets canceled, or very large, someone in your family has a terminal illness, right? Yeah. These things can totally knock us over. And what the novelist is here to teach us is that there's a beauty of foresight and reflection and thoughtfulness that we can bring to chaos to help organize it. And also, too, that the novelist has a little bit of room to grow. Yeah. To set aside some of those tendencies.
Right. So it gives you a sense of, so much of the work that you advance in AQ is about how we flex and develop this type of intelligence. And so these archetypes also give us a little peephole into where we might be flexing. Yes. In order to develop.
Think about your story, what you told about 10 years ago when your editor said, you're just not good enough to do this. And I imagine you probably made a plan and you made a list of all the people that you needed to talk to. that
were you in my head? Because that's how it went.
and you probably felt a lot of empowerment from being able to make that list, schedule those meetings, input that research, talk to people to understand what your options were, and then to have a new plan come out of that. If you're a novelist, you not only do this for yourself, you do it for the people around you at work.
Yeah.
Which is a really beautiful thing.
Another characteristic of a novelist is we like autonomy.
Yes. The novelist, so each of the archetypes is motivated by one core driver.
Yeah.
And for the novelist, it's freedom.
Yes.
And freedom meaning that I want the freedom to plan my life. And it's not about, where you work or who you work for as much as do you have that say in where you are going? Can you make that plan yourself?
Yeah. Understanding this about myself helped me understand what career choice I should make next.
Yes.
How I wanted to spend the time that I had in a day, who I would flourish being responsible for, and who I might not. Let's touch on a few others. My self-absorption with the novelist archetype being what it is. Talk about firemen, because you are married to one.
Yes, I'm married to one. We are opposites. The firefighter is so great at all that spontaneous emergency work that is very upsetting for the novelist. So they're the person you call in an emergency situation. They make great problem solvers real time. The downside is they're so adept at solving any real-time issue that they think, I don't actually need to plan.
Yeah.
Things are going to change anyway. And in my work, I coach a lot of CEOs and founders of early stage tech companies. Firefighting is one of the key components of that job description because so much is unknown. You probably don't have product market fit yet. Your technology is on V1 and things are constantly breaking. And what's interesting is that a lot of that foresight of, okay, let's think 2-3 years ahead, there's just no time for that.
Yeah.
And so actually if the novelist and firefighter, when they can come together, it makes for a really beautiful team at work.
Yeah. Once you get over the frustration of the fact that a person works totally different than you do.
Yes.
And I just want to call out myself for labeling the firefighter fireman. You did not do that in your book, but I just did that in colloquial conversation. Okay, so that brings us to the astronaut.
Yes. On the surface, you might think that the astronaut is the most high AQ of all the types because they are very fast at both proactive and reactive change.
Yeah.
So remember the novelist, great at proactive change. That's the change that we will ourselves. And the firefighter is great at reactive change. That's the type of change that we receive, that we didn't plan for. And the astronaut is actually completely fine in both. So imagine an astronaut floating around in space. They are innovators. They're at the forefront of what's happening next in the world. And they are motivated by passion. They have to love what it is that they're doing. And when they do, they put 110% into it from a passion perspective as well as speed. So they're very, very fast. And the downside is that they can become lower AQ because they have a hard time rallying people around them.
Yeah.
If you're an astronaut, you might have heard things like this from the people around you, like, can you slow down?
Yep.
I don't understand what you mean.
Yep.
You just said that you were doing X. Now you're doing Y. I'm confused.
Take me along with you.
Take me along with you. Exactly. And so on their own, they're very, very high AQ, but we all need to do this with the people around us. And so my advice, my tip for astronauts out there is like, you're great on your own, but to be the highest level AQ yourself, you need to just really learn how to give turn signals and help all the people who are with you on this ride actually follow you into your vision.
Yeah. And this brings us to our neurosurgeon.
Our neurosurgeon is the opposite of the astronaut because they seem like they are lower AQ on the surface, but it's not actually true. So the neurosurgeon is, if you think about what a neurosurgeon does, they go to school for 15 plus years before they can practice. So our archetype is like that because they need to feel extremely prepared, researched, and to have expertise in what they're doing before they can move forward.
Perfectionist.
Perfectionist, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're motivated by excellence. Mm-hmm. They have a higher bar than anyone else. And a neurosurgeon might be the type of person who says, I don't feel comfortable shipping this. It's not good enough. Whereas everyone else looks at it and says, it's amazing.
Right. You want your neurosurgeon to be a perfectionist.
You do. And you want them to be in the right job. And I think if you're a neurosurgeon out there, if you can look back on your career and think about the moments where that's really been the skill that people have wanted you for, it's something you should feel really proud of. And the downside is that you might be a little slower to act. Personally, professionally, you are a very loyal person. You're friends with people for a very long time, probably since childhood. But one thing is that, sometimes things just need to move a little faster. I have a neurosurgeon friend who really wanted to buy an apartment, and she had everything set up to do it. And she looked for 10 years consistently until she finally found the one that she really wanted.
Yeah.
And that's fine for a neurosurgeon. And where I would just push towards a little bit greater AQ is to remember that your version of perfect is extreme. And so your version of mediocre is probably someone else's version of perfect.
You reference this idea of like being in a job that might not be the right job for your archetype. In the world that I came into, if you were in a job at the beginning of your career, you were probably in it for the lion's share of your career. But for young people coming into the work world now, and you reference this in your book, they're liable to change careers how many times?
18 times. 18 jobs across 6 different industries.
So it becomes more and more important for you to give consideration to the role that you're in and for you to feel empowered enough to shift the role. And it feels to me like this set of tools is a really great way to know which way to shift.
Yes, particularly because, as you mentioned, there is no such thing as a career ladder anymore. And so what you need to have faith in and belief in is not the ladder, but rather your own athletic ability. So
I'm laughing here because I have no athletic ability, but I'm going with what you're saying because you want me to strengthen the muscles of my AQ.
Exactly. And what that means is that if you're a neurosurgeon, I'm looking for something where I can deliver excellence, where they need me to execute on complex projects that have a lot of moving pieces. I call them glass ball projects because unlike a plastic ball, you can drop it, it'll bounce. Glass balls, you really, really can't drop them. You have to be very particular about getting them right the first time. And that's a huge asset. And also knowing that you have resilience. So for a neurosurgeon, once they decide that they want something, nothing will stop them from getting it. So that is very, very high AQ. And I think when you're looking at your own job and your own career, don't think about your job title.
Yeah.
That's becoming less and less relevant, but thinking about what your emotional why is behind that. So for instance, I have worked in tech since 2008. I worked at a venture capital firm where I was the only female executive there. I've been an executive coach. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. And when people ask me what I do, I answer it 2 ways. I generally say my mission is to help people reach their greatest potential, which is a lot more fluid than most job titles.
Yes.
And I say at this current moment, I do that through writing, coaching, and speaking. And that will likely change. I imagine it'll probably change in 2 or 3 years. I don't know where the coaching industry is going. You can stick your finger out and try to get a sense of the wind, but there's no way that it won't be disrupted by AI. And so I try to hold lightly to some of these, what I call technical skills, like writing, like coaching, that currently enable me to achieve my mission, but may not be true. There was a study through the Harvard Digital Reskilling Lab that showed that our technical skills only have a 5-year half-life. And in the tech industry, it's even shorter. It's 2.5 years. And so I think that we are all required now to make peace with the fact that these hard-won technical skills, they come and they go. But what is persistent is you.
Yeah.
What you're good at, what your toolkit is.
And it feels to me like your book allows us to feel confident in what it might mean to have faith in ourselves, to bet on ourselves, knowing that that is the best bet that we can make.
Yes, exactly. I think you actually have captured the heart of the book, which is a call to invest in yourself.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, everything is shifting around us. And it might feel like, stable ground to be in a job right now in this moment. That's great. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We need to invest in ourselves because IQ is stagnant. Your IQ doesn't actually really change over time, barring any sort of traumatic events.
Yeah.
EQ, It can shift, but it's been shown that people really have a range of what they can do. You could be at the lower end of possible or the higher end.
Right.
But AQ is very, very much in flux. Like you can actually control that. You can will your AQ to be higher tomorrow than it is today simply through the actions you take.
Okay, and I want to add one more thing to that, which is that by virtue of the internet-powered world in which we came of age, where we could reach for our digital device in our pocket and learn everything from what the options were going to be for dinner at the restaurant tonight to what the weather is going to be tomorrow at 9:15 in the morning, AQ has atrophied. We have gone the other direction. And so learning these skills, improving these skills, is not asking us to take on something new. It's asking us to revisit something that it is our birthright to be good at.
Yes, exactly. I think we're just asking that we rewind a little bit and recapture what's important, which is why I think the language really matters, is because you can't seek something without knowing how to describe it.
Yeah.
And I think when we value AQ, we're really saying, okay, let's put this in our job descriptions. Let's look for high AQ candidates. Let's test for this in, practical interviews that we're doing. Let's also, run performance reviews where we're not just looking at, how well someone executed on X, Y, or Z that's in their current scope, but we're also looking at their future potential and what their AQ is too.
And at the same time, for those of us who are out talking about what we bring to organizations, probably if you drop the word AQ into a job interview, you're not going to get a lot of knowledge yet. But if you start describing what AQ unlocks for you, here's what I have been able to do. I've been able to move from this role to this role, unlocking XYZ. It becomes a differentiator.
Yes. And that's the thing is when you look at a resume, we've been trained to scan for what is perfect, right? Those logical leaps from one job to another. But what I actually think is really interesting is the context in between.
Yeah.
And where those leaps may not actually make a lot of sense at first glance, and directing the conversation there and seeing it as an asset. How did you move from this one industry to something completely different? What happened during this break in time? That's fascinating for me. What did you learn?
Yeah.
And then also, how have you in the past managed to, present yourself, even though you weren't an ideal candidate for a role that you then thrived in later on.
Right.
I think that's actually where it's interesting. Those are the conversations that we want to have.
Okay. One final question. You are the new teacher. You are the new headmaster at a school in the community. What is one thing you are going to take off the syllabus immediately?
I think what's really important is actually thinking about how the work gets done.
Yeah.
And so if I'm looking at the syllabus, then I feel like any sort of not that we don't, love competition and feeling like an internal sense of competition. But what I will say is that anything that's on the syllabus that sort of takes the children and like stack ranks them against each other, I think is not beneficial for AQ. Because once again, you're turning to an external confirmation of your own ability. You're saying, okay, am I better than these people around you? And one of the fundamental premises of AQ is to turn that work inward towards yourself and stop thinking as much about these external validators, whether it's your IQ, a standardized test, or, some promotion that you get. While those are signal, oftentimes they're also noise.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything that's taking the child's attention away from that internal sense of knowing how to navigate for themselves, then that's what I would take off. And in lieu of that, I would try to teach them skills for how to not just, take a blueprint and execute perfectly, but rather to carve their own path, to forge their own trail, to write their own story, because they are going to arrive over and over again at forks in the road, and there will not be any sort of clear advice on where to go, and they're going to have to figure it out themselves.
That was Liz Tran, leadership coach and author of AQ, A New Kind of Intelligence for a World That's Always Changing. You can find it anywhere books are sold. And if you get our book, take that archetype quiz. Let me know if it resonates. It certainly did for me. I'm a novelist, clearly. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Ava Ahmadbegi, Rachel Karp, and Adam Yates. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gidron. The show is mixed by Tim Boland. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.